I remember once I was sitting together with some friends, and I felt really deep. And I said, "Ars longa, vita brevis." Art is long, life is short. And I covered the whole history, everything that it has to do with sculpture and painting is about, getting in touch with the main artery of whole humanity. Little did I know, of course, that the quote means that the science of medicine is long and life is short.
Yeah, but that's where that's where we always get into conflict with people. They wonder why we don't use the word art, because art goes back to ars in Roman times, and are, I think, in Greece, which means to do.
No, well, then you're talking about techne, which are supposed to be the sort of the similar terms, but that's where you have to talk about art with a lowercase a and a.
The distinction that Larry Shiner makes in the Invention of Art is there's a difference between an art and fine art, which is the break in the 18th century that is so essential to what we are talking about.
Well, your father said it very poignantly once. It's not an art to make art, but it is an art to make kitsch.
Yes.
Yeah, right. And I think that term confuses a lot of people, because you find ars or art, the art of painting, or you find
the art of masonry, the art of cooking.
That's the point, because then it's referring to the discipline, which is something that you can rationally learn and then teach to the other person.
So it's not like we don't use the word art, but we use it in the correct context. And because I think many we have talked about this before, it can seem like identity politics that we don't want to use the word art. We use the word kitsch.
Yeah, because we identify as kitsch painters.
But it's not that we don't we identify as something else than art. The problem is that you had this change in the 18th century. It's like the mid 18th century where art, or it was first called fine art, the grouping of fine arts by Charles Bateau, and then they stripped away fine and just art.
Yeah.
In the end, I think with Winkelmann was the first to use that term in the 1750s, and then you get something like because the word art means science, and then suddenly you get art in itself, like a science in itself with the word art, a work of art. If you translate it with the old understanding, the original understanding, it would be like saying the science of science or something, the art of art. And what is that?
Yeah, well, that's indicative of how words are being changed to mean the exact opposite of what they meant. Because what happens in the 18th century, of course, is that the word art, which means knowledge, is turned into non-knowledge. And that, of course, is the Kantian idea of the genius. And that, I think that's why you cannot, I try to emphasize that all the time. When I say that Rembrandt was not an artist, I'm not doing it to be funny or polemical or like to over exaggerate the point or anything, but just quite rationally, if you list the points of what defines the concept of fine art, then it is that handcraft is something we do not use anymore because it's something old, and they start to talk about how it's something a craft is something you do just to make money. Right? And of course this idea that you have to be original, create something new, distance yourself to what has been created before, and not the least this idea of the genius who cannot learn anything. You're not supposed to learn it, and therefore that's the most amazing thing that Kant says. You are only creating art when you do not know what you're doing.
Yeah, but
so that's saying you only know what you're doing when you do not know what you're doing.
Yeah, but these ideas start actually quite much earlier than Kant.
Yeah,
and I've been going down the rabbit hole of trying to find the original source for this whole I call it the art virus, where to learn a craft doesn't mean anything because it's about your natural talent. And I found I found a guy, I've been talking about Alexander Gerard previously. He wrote this essay on the genius. It's from the 1770s, and of course he uses Homer as the example of the greatest genius of all times. And he penetrated himself. He used no models. He said, and that's why it's so great. And I forgot to mention a point last time I talked about it, that when Schliemann discovered Troy in the late 1800s, or I think it was 1879, he completely, shattered the foundation upon which Gerard built his whole idea about the superior genius, because Troy was an actual city and events actually happened. So Homer he used models. So he wasn't a genius, if we should...
In the Kantian sense, yeah.
Or in the Gerard sense.
The art sense, yeah.
Yeah, but then I found someone even earlier that talks in a very similar manner. His name is Joseph Addison, and he was a critic and a poet. And he started a magazine in the early 1700s, like our colleagues have started the Sivilisasjonen. It lasted for only a couple of years. It's called The Spectator. And in 1712, he wrote about the genius the following. Among great geniuses, those few draw the admiration of all the world upon them and stand up as the prodigies of mankind, who, by the mere strength of natural parts, and without any assistance of art or learning, have produced works that were the delight of their own times and the wonder of posterity.
Right.
And a little bit further, an imitation of the best authors is not to compare with a good original. And it's quite early, 1712.
Wow.
Yeah, how far does it go back? Suddenly we find even more.
In a way, it's. One thing that. We were talking about the what is called, I think, the long 18th century, like at least 1680 to 1830, where this is established or it gets established, and then you have so many things going on. One thing is that science has clearly developed and progressed, and they get inspired by that, and they want the same thing for what becomes fine art, that you have to progress and not be better than what was before, right?
They start to use the science, language and logic on poetry.
Speaking of this whole sort of conservative trap to believe in progress as a fundamental, as a value in itself. But there's also the thing about the influence of the Plato's idea. He doesn't use, I guess, the word genius, but it's sort of similar. This thing about not copying what is in the world around you, but being inspired. Right?
Plato?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. That you are. That's how he describes the poet. That he is sort of enthused. Theo in God, or God is in you, inspired. And that also is one thing that influences this way of thinking about the genius, which then separates itself from empiricism, meaning to learn a craft and to study nature, that should be a basis at all.
Yeah, and of course, if you go back, Joseph Addison, that's fine, 1712. If you go back, you can find traces of this in Plato, quite clearly in Plato. And also in Luther, who believed in that the good intention had more value than the good deed. But something happens in the 18th century, like throughout the 18th centuries, that I think Larry Scheiner points it out, that in the beginning of the 1700s, everyone, the notion was that anyone could become a genius through learning.
And practice.
Using rules and reason. Yeah. And then by the late 1700s, the notion was that only a few people can be geniuses, and it's something you're either you're born with it, or it's some kind of other mystical thing that you have to go through.
Right, you distance yourself from reality, and that's why I'm totally occupy that now about critical theory now, because I realized that this is just a copy of what happened with art. When you completely distance yourself from reality, and there's what they call standpoint theory, that I have a truth and you have a truth. There's no objective measurements, objective rules for a craft that you can go to and learn and judge your work. And that goes out, right? And then you get the idea of the genius who just floats, right?
And that's back to Andrew Breitbart's point that politics is downstream from culture. So it starts with culture, and then suddenly people realize it when it hits politics, because that's something everyone engages in all the time.
That's why I said to Sebastian, Salvo, they react when it comes into mathematics, but we've been living with this for, in practice, really in practice, for at least like 150 years. Thank you for checking out this video from the Cave of Apelles. If you want to watch the entire segment, head over to caveofapelles.com/donate and become a $5 patron. Then you can access our masterclasses, bonus material with our guests, painting videos, and more.